Welcome back to Business Literacy. We are in Module 4, Written Communication, and this is Part 2, Good Written Communication, and we are going to try and distinguish what constitutes good written communication as opposed to bad written communication. Now, what is the problem with written communication? It is, of course, that we cannot count on nonverbal communication to enhance meaning. If I am saying something to you in person, and while I am making a confirmative statement, I'm shaking my head, you will know that I'm not meaning it. But when I am writing, it's a lot more difficult to pick up on things like that, unless I am a fantastically skilled writer and you are a very skilled reader. So what do we need to do? We need to develop our vocabulary so that you don't always use the same word, but you can use different words and just make your writing a little bit more interesting. It is always better to use the active voice to say that John kicked the ball or John kicks the ball rather than the ball is being kicked by John. So be active. That is where the verb follows the direct object. Pay attention to punctuation and use the correct ones. The correct use of spacing, marks, symbols, all of those things are important. And use neologisms or new words sparingly. That's a new word or expression because maybe the person who is reading whatever it is that you have written has not heard the word yet or has not encountered it yet, and so therefore completely unaware of what you are trying to say in your written communication. Bad written grammar, well, avoid the following. I already said avoid irony, words that has a contradicting meaning, because it's difficult to pick up on that in written language. Repetition, do not repeat what you already said or use words with the same meaning unnecessary. That's called redundancy. Or use more words than needed. That is called verbosity. Then you have a couple of examples there, and in most of these 4 examples, there's no irony there, but repetition, redundancy, and verbosity are sometimes present in one sentence. For example, I am here to tell you that this government is a government for the people because we are serving the people. That's bad. And in any case, that's not something that you would put in writing. It looks like a statement that somebody would make from a stage. It would be much better to say, this government are committed to serving the people. Next one, the future potential of this investment is good for the future. Well, if it is a future potential, it will be good for the future. You don't have to repeat future twice. And of course, any investment is focused on the future in any case. So it would have been better to say, this is a good investment. As simple as that. The airline reservation system handles airline reservation data. Well, what else is it going to handle? Doesn't make sense. No? In view of a downturn, we downsized. You can just say we downsized. Okay. Common punctuation. I already said to you that it is the correct use of spacing, marks, and symbols, and I've just given you couple of the most common ones there so that you know when to use what. The apostrophe shows that the noun owns something, like your, instead of you are, and then you use the apostrophe. The comma is used to separate parts of a sentence. A hyphen is used to join words. Sometimes you have a word and not quite sure if it is a word that must be written as 2 words or as 1 word. And then when you look it up, you will find that the dictionary tells you that it's fine to write it as either 1 word or 2 words. And then often a hyphen is very good to use. A dash is used to indicate a range or a pause. Just look at the difference there between the hyphen and dash. The hyphen is a shorter line, while the dash is a longer line. And then the quotation marks, well, that indicates direct speed. It is called quotation marks because you are quoting somebody. And just to illustrate to you how much punctuation matters, you look at the 2 sentences there. The panda eats, shoots, and leaves. Okay, so that's what a panda does. It eats, shoots, and leaves. It's its food. But if you read it like the panda eats, shoots, and leaves, suddenly you have a very violent panda who is shooting at people before running off. So punctuation does matter. Those two words, those two sentences have completely different meanings. Some grammar and style considerations. Are you going to write in the first person, I say, or the third person, he said, or are you going to keep it impersonal, it was said? Now, when you are writing, I think it's always better to use the first person, because you are indeed the one that's writing, and then say, I believe that. It's much better than saying, he believes that. No, keep it into the first person. I already talked about passive voice and active voice. Always use the passive voice, the active voice. It's much better than the passive voice. It sounds more assertive as well. And then long sentences or short sentences. In South Africa, many of us are not first language English speakers. And so why use long, complicated sentences? Use short sentences. It also makes life a lot easier for the marker or the facilitator, and it makes it more difficult for you to make a mistake. Then we also have some archaic expression or old-fashioned English. So John went forth to pay homage to the Lord of the Manor. Okay, that's old English. John went to visit the Lord of the Manor. Or you can also pay homage to a dead person. He went to the funeral. Either one's fine. My wife is in confinement, and then people are wondering why you are keeping your wife locked up, when in fact the meaning of that confinement is that your wife's pregnant. Okay, we're going to have a baby. Okay, and then here, Herbert is a gay fellow. Now, in the times that we live in, gay has different meaning. It talks about sexual orientation, but in that case, it just means that he's a happy fellow. So we don't use the word gay to illustrate happy as much as was before, or unless it is absolutely clear from the context that that is indeed what you mean. And there's a lot more principles of business writing that you will be able to find in your textbook. Please have a look at that. Like I already said, it's better to use simple, concise, and correct English. And here I'm giving you a couple of tips. State the purpose and get to the point quickly. Nobody has time to read long-winded sentences and pages. We are pressed for time, all of us, and if you don't get to the purpose and to the point quickly, you have lost the person to who you have addressed the communication. Only use everyday words that you understand. There is nothing worse than somebody using a word that they themselves do not understand in order to appear intelligent. You are not looking intelligent if you do that. You are looking dumb. Remain professional and positive. Okay. Avoid too much emotion and avoid too many words. Also, do not discriminate. Sometimes it gets a bit lengthy if you have to refer to he or she or they, but try to do your best and do not discriminate. Okay. Use short sentences and use the active voice. Now, I think by now you realize that you must do that. Use short sentences and use the active voice, because I think that's about the third or fourth time that I've said it now. Always do a spell check before you hit the send on the email or before you sign that letter or ever. Always do a spell check, but know that it's not foolproof. So therefore you have to know, like those three words, to, or to. I'm going to someplace, T-O. There's two of us, T-W-O. And do you believe this too? Okay, do you also agree with me? So, but there are many other words like that that you just need to know which is the right one to use. And just a reminder, remember in the exam you often get this question where they give you a sentence and then they give you 4 options. And if you can't do this type of thing, then you will struggle with that question. Effective headings. Well, of course, if your headings are ineffective, then you are sure that your communication is not going to get read. If your heading is effective, even if the rest of the writing is not up to standard, chances are that your audience is still going to read it, or the person to whom you addressed it is still going to read it. Why? So what's the idea with effective headings? It is that you must capture the audience attention with effective headings, layout, and graphics. As you will see on these slides, for instance, I do not have a slide without a heading. And in that heading, I'm trying to give you an indication as to what is going to follow on the slide. And if the headings are bad or it is meaningless, then you are going to be bored by the slide, most likely. So what are the principles when it comes to effective headings? It must not be too short and meaningless, because if it's too short, it could be meaningless, and it most certainly must not be too long either. It must describe what is to follow. It must set the tone, draw the reader in, so it can be interesting. If you can make the heading interesting, of course, make the heading interesting. On slides, academic slides like that, not always easy to make the heading interesting. It must be a complete thought. Effective headings is a complete thought. It must be relevant. It is, because this is a slide on effective headings. And it must be clear and unambiguous. So don't put a heading that can be interpreted in several ways. Now, sometimes you do want to do that. You actually want people to misinterpret so that you can draw them in and then make the big reveal, and then it is fine. Okay. Fonts and effects. Your fonts must be easy to read. Okay. You will see in most of my slides, I am keeping the visual effects to a minimum, and I'm using a font that is easy to read. And I'm also staying away from too much colors. This is not exactly black on white. This is a dark blue on white that is almost as good. Why? Because the corporate colors is a dark blue. So it is a way for me to personalize the slides, and that is why I'm using the dark blue. But dark blue against a white background is good. You'll also see in the layout, never be afraid of white open spaces. In fact, white open spaces is good. Then the person who is reading the communication doesn't feel like they are giving too much information and doesn't become unbearable. And then use these for emphasis only, upper and lower case. Stick to the normal way of writing a sentence. You start the sentence with a capital, and unless there is a real need, like a personal name that you need to use the uppercase, don't do it. Okay. Different sizes. Gee, stick to one size, so that because if you're not sticking to one size, then inevitably the person who's going to read it is going to think to themselves that whatever is smaller is less important than what was bigger, and maybe it was just because you had a space problem. So if you have a space problem, for instance, on a slide like this, then instead of just making one of the little frames smaller, make both the same size, then at least your audience still know that what they are reading are of equal importance. Also, bold and italics, very good to use, but use them sparingly. Okay, you will see on this particular slide I have used both. I used bold here as the headings of the two different slides, and there at the top I used italics. In fact, that's bold and italics, but it is to tell you what is the function of effective headings. And often in my slides, when I do something like that, it will also be a definition, and that is why I'm using it. Then if we have a bit more of a look at the layout and the graphics, remember that a simple uncluttered layout will make the reader think the content will be good too. Okay. If it is cluttered, then it's an overload of information, and after a while, really nobody cares. So layout principles, keep your paragraphs short. You will see in a presentation like this, I even like to frame my paragraph so that I can keep different concepts apart, and you can basically know that when you are going to study for a test or an exam, that every time you see something in a little frame, you know that that could be a typical exam questions. What are the layout principles for written communication? And then you can say the following. There must be short paragraphs. Make use of headings and subheadings. If it is a list, make use of bullet points. Save color for graphics. Watch your numbering. Sometimes there is an auto numbering, and the auto numbering might be different from what you intended. Then you have to fix it, and be sure that it doesn't just go and autocorrect because the program that you are using thinks it must be written in a certain way when in fact you have completely other intentions. The graphics principles. The graphics that you use must add interest to whatever it is that you are writing, and it can be a visual summary. Don't just put graphics in there for no reason, just because you think it looks nice. And by doing it, I can show people that I know how to insert graphics in a document. You are not impressing anybody, you are confusing them. The graphic types, well, there are signs and symbols that you can use, and some of those are very common. Then there's illustrations that you can use, graphs like bar, and line graphs. Please know when to use which one. If you are talking about the different percentages or parts of a whole, then a pie chart is good to use. If you are trying to indicate a change in one variable, then a line chart is possibly a lot better. And if you are trying to compare three different variables, then of course a bar chart or bar graph will be much better. Flow charts are for step-by-step processes, and that is where you will sometimes use arrows and other signs and symbols. Please make sure they are normally a specific way that is required, and make sure that you use the right way for the right flow chart. Tables must have headings and can be reordered. That's what you would do in Excel, not always just in Excel, sometimes in Word. A table is just a better way to summarize information that you've already given people. That's why you give a table. Then there can be organograms and organizational charts as well, to show the relationship between people in an organization, for instance. And then there can also be maps. So these are just some of the graphic types. Please understand that in this course, I cannot go into detail. I am just reminding you of things that you have already done in the past.